Welcome back. Hi, Marcus. Hi, Roman. I hope I did not scare you yesterday, so you came back. Excellent. Let's give more people a chance to join in the next couple minutes. I assume you can see my screen with the slides. And just like yesterday, everything I'm showing is based on this repo. So today, I want to continue showing how we can run the same example application using CircleCI and Netlify build. So let me switch to the CircleCI section. Now, I want to say that, remember how yesterday we first looked at generic CI on GitHub Actions, where we said, okay, we have to install, we have to configure cache, we have to start application, we have to wait for the URL, we have to run the test, we have to record the test in Cypress dashboard, and so on. Like, you can do the same thing step by step yourself, just using CircleCI configuration for language, I guess it's YAML. But today we're gonna skip all that. And instead, just like we went to using Cypress GitHub Action, if you run your test on CircleCI, you can use the orb I've written called CircleCI orb from Cypress. And that orb is probably my favorite way of running end-to-end Cypress tests on any CI, right? That orb is just so powerful, and you will see the power really, really soon. And we'll be able not only run like single machine tests, but we'll, in just like a few lines of code, we'll be able to run things in parallel with a single line, and we'll be able to install things in one job and run multiple testing jobs in parallel, which is something that you always have to kind of tweak on GitHub Actions, but on Circle, it's almost instantaneous. Now, the orb I'm using is open source, of course, and it has its own source code. You can look at the orb YAML that we have written over the years. And GitHub Actions that we use from Cypress is just a repo, use it directly. But for the CircleCI orbs, they actually run their own registry. And so you can find the Cypress orb registered there. It's one of the most popular orbs, but is not written, notice right here, but is not written by Circle itself or by, for something like Slack, for example. So definitely widely used by many people. Okay, so let's see how we can use it. Again, the motivation is you are already concentrating on building a web application, right? You don't want to know how to specifically run Cypress, right? You just know that there's an app, install dependencies, run tests, close it down, show me the results, right? So you don't want to fiddle with all the arguments that are necessary, okay? And that's what orb simplifies, because Cypress team can actually create all the settings specific for CircleCI, specifically for running with Cypress. They know how to do it. Now, because this orb is not written by the Circle people, you have to enable sometimes on your CircleCI using third-party orbs. They might have changed it already. It might be already enabled by default, but it's still something you have to watch out if you cannot use it directly. Okay, so I hope you have CircleCI account. Let's run tests. So here's a Circle workflow file that I will create in my repository. So let me add a file. You can put it here or you can put it in subfolder, doesn't really matter. And this is the entire file. Okay, so quick explanation before we actually run the job. We importing the orb, right? And again, it's organization and the orb name and the version, just like GitHub Action, can be very specific, or it could be like here, use the latest version that has one major version. And then we give it orb a name so that we can refer to that orb later. And that orb has container definitions or executor definitions. It has jobs, it has commands. And the main two things that we're going to work with is, first of all, this run job that the orb defines. Think of this as like reusable job definition. So in my workflow, I'll just say, okay, just run this this job, right? That's it. So this definition comes from this orb. And again, just like with GitHub Actions, that orb, each job has parameters. Okay, and if you want to see all parameters, you have to go to the docs, jobs. So this is the run job, and what else? There's also install job that we'll use later. As you can see, the run job is pretty much similar to GitHub Action parameters, right? You can, for example, start a job. So where is the start command, build command, wait on command, browser spec, right? So you can pretty much assume very close match between GitHub Actions, orbs, and so on. Okay. So in this case, we're passing parameter. The start command is npm start. We're waiting for the URL to respond again, which takes care of apps that take a while to build and start serving the app. And then it will run Cypress. Okay, so let's see how it works. So I will add Circle and I will commit it. I'll push the code and I'll go to CircleCI. Okay, log in with GitHub, continue. Okay, projects. And I just pushed to workshop example repo. So Circle orders all of this by the last commit, I believe. So we'll just say set it up. Right now, they can offer a bunch of templates. We don't care. We already have our own file. Okay, they don't find it. I guess they now require, initial file to be in a different repo. So okay, no big deal. So I'll make that circle folder to the CircleCI. And I'm gonna move the circle file to that circle config YAML. That's the name. Okay, move circle file, push it again. Okay, so reload, setup project. Okay, found the file that I just moved, and I'll just say start building. Okay, now these are all the pipelines, and for the workflow build, which was the name right here, right? Workflow is called build. It contains a single job, and by default, it uses Cypress run, and we can give it a different name, right? Something like this. And I don't use emoji because then it will not be able to refer to the job from our job. So we can give it a specific name rather than Cypress run. Now, notice that the Cypress run seems very simple, right? But in reality, look how many parts it actually creates. So let's see where these are coming from. Okay, so I've done this, I've done that, started building. Okay, so all the steps the Circle is executing, it's spinning up an environment. By default, it's Docker, medium size. If you find that the project crashes or freezes or the video is choppy, there are different resource types. So you can actually increase this size to medium plus, large, extra large, and so on. So by default, notice that it's spinning a container using Cypress Docker image. Pump it up a little bit. Remember yesterday I've shown Cypress Docker images repo. So by default, the orb uses Cypress Node 12 image, right? Pulls it from the Docker Hub and creates a Linux container. It actually sets all these different variables, and the Cypress orb can use those variables to make sure that all the jobs that, for example, all the containers that start in parallel are all connected, because it knows, for example, like the unique workflow ID, right? So it can link everything directly into a single dashboard run, so you don't have to worry about this. That makes it very easy to run jobs in parallel. Now, we're gonna skip attaching workspace. I'll explain the slide later, but notice it actually checks out the code, restores the cache. Notice you didn't have to specify anything, right? Cypress CircleCI orb takes care of installation, correct caching of NPM and Cypress binary. It runs the install and it looks if you have a log file, like if you're using, let's say, yarn, right? It will use yarn. If it finds package log, like in our case, it will install using npm CI, right? Install everything. Remember how I said you want to make sure that you can run using Cypress verify command, or runs it for you once and then saves the cache, right? And it's the same folders for Linux as we had using GitHub Action. Persisting to workspace starts the application in the background. I actually like starting this application on Circle because it starts in the background and outputs the app's output separately from Cypress output, because it's a different step. Okay, waited for localhost to respond using wait on utility, and then it started running Cypress. You don't have to worry about this. I'll explain this slightly later. Default free specs found. I fixed the first one, failed the second one, and so on. So pretty straightforward, and you don't have to do anything. Copy, paste, the example, hello world example, and it works, and it works correctly. Okay. Again, it understands yarn. Just say yarn true, and it will use yarn commands instead of npm commands. Now, like I said, I just usually use the latest version of orb, and these are the versions that are tied to the CircleCI orb registry, which is kind of similar to npm registry. All the orbs are stored there immutable by version, but you can definitely be more careful, right? And only use the versions that you approved, reviewed, and so on. We not only release versions to the CircleCI orb registry, we also register them as tags, all right, on GitHub. So you know, if, for example, you need a bug fix or particular feature, right, like working directory, you can definitely find which orb version has it, and then you can use that specific version. Okay, one thing that is unnecessarily slow right here. So we save the cache, right? Let's see. Notice this 32-second step, persisting to workspace. The interesting thing about CircleCI workflows, So you want to be able to say, okay, this job is finished, and then maybe you do deploy. And what do you have to deploy? Well, you have to, again, check out files, install things, and deploy it. But CircleCI does it slightly differently. Any job can say attach workspace, I believe, right? And, or persist workspace, I don't remember, but something like persist, right? And say, okay, maybe my site folder. Like you want to store specific folders that you build, right? And then another job can say attach workspace or restore workspace. I forgot, right? And you can say, like at root, for example. So this whole folder will be saved, zipped up, stored, and then the next job in that workflow automatically gets it. And if you have multiple jobs waiting, they all get it. And you don't have to worry about, naming, uploading, nothing. So by default, this is happening because I don't know if you want to deploy something after you run test or not. So the way you can disable this step, because we don't have anything after this job, right, is to say remove persisting to workspace. So how do we know where is it? Okay, so let's say we go back to the documentation for the org, and we have examples. So this is a simple example that we can copy paste. Notice this is incorrect because we're not starting the app here. So, but once we get here, we can see all our situations. How do, for example, run tests on Mac? How do you parallelize things? How do you build application? How do you install private dependencies? So right about here, you have skip saving workspace, which kind of looks like what I'm looking to do. So I'll click on this, and it shows how to do things faster. You say no workspace is true parameter, okay? Because we don't need to store any of the files after we run the test. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Marcus, Roman, Walter, can someone comment in the chat if you can still see my screen? Okay, thank you. Because I just saw like weird pop-up. Okay, thank you. Okay, skip saving workspace. So I'm gonna save the workflow file and I'm gonna push it. And now let's go back to our workflow, right? So it took 3 minutes. Okay, so notice restoring cache previously, stored, right? So we don't have to worry about this. Installation. Okay, notice install everything in 6 seconds because everything was already installed. It just had to check it and copy things in the right place. Started the app, right? Running test, but notice there is no saving workspace, right? Step. So we just saved ourselves 30 seconds just because we don't need it. What is this resource? It even, wow, but this is a new tab. By the way, if you find CircleCI UI pretty nice, right, and usable and fast, they use Cypress to test their UI. So this is a very fortunate cycle where Cypress builds everything and releases from Circle, and Circle is using Cypress to test their UI. So hopefully those two companies improve each other's software. Okay, so the test still fails as expected, so that's good. Okay, this is what I've shown, and it should cut down on timing. Let's see when it finishes completely. Okay, workflow. Okay, let's just come on, finish. What is it doing? What is it still doing? It would be so impressive if it finished. Oh, it's the last test. Okay, now it's finished. Okay, so we had 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Now we have 2 minutes and 10. And yes, it includes caching dependencies, but also we're not saving files unnecessarily. Okay. The second thing, we want to know the results. I have to say, you can store artifacts, you can store, just like we stored videos and screenshots and everything on GitHub, but it's just very inconvenient, honestly, just to see it. So we're gonna go back to our project. Where is it? GitHub workshop example, right, which is my folder. Okay, I'm gonna click on the dashboard and I'm gonna go to project settings. Now, again, I want to record results written or like generated on Circle to the dashboard so I can see them here, because right now these are all GitHub actions. Okay, so we can use the same record key or we can generate a new one. So let's generate a new one, because then we will see who used it last, which probably allows you slightly more security, so you can disable the key that was leaked. So let's copy this, go back to the project. Okay, project settings, environment variables, add Cypress record key, and just set that value. Okay, notice it's gonna be abstracted by default or like hidden by default. So we can do this, right? And now we have to see how to record to the dashboard. Okay, so again, just find an example. There are lots of examples. Go to recording, just record true. And another thing that you can do, you wanna separate the GitHub runs from CircleCI runs. Okay, yes, it will be shown right here, right, which CI, but you want to be able to quickly find runs by tag so that you can see, okay, where's my CircleCI run? You can use tags for, let's say, smoke test, nightly test. Okay, so how do we tag our runs on the dashboard? Okay, tag. Okay, pass tags to the dashboard. Okay, tags. So we'll say tags, and I'll say CircleCI. And if I'm adding a tag for CircleCI, why don't I go to my GitHub action and I will tag. I think this is tag. I have to look it up. 1 second. GitHub Cypress. GitHub. I always forget if it's tags, singular, or plural. Okay, so this is singular. You see all this little inconsistency. GitHub. Okay, and I'll tag in both jobs so they for sure get there. So we are tagged and recorded here, and we tagged and recorded there. So let's see how this works. Add tags. Okay, so this is correct. Record tags. And I'm gonna go back to, let's say, the project. It's running the tests. Okay, hasn't finished yet, but let's go back to the latest runs. And we should see now the same recordings. And for each commit, now we will have a logical run for GitHub and another run for Circle. And this is an unusual situation, I would say, because notice GitHub, Circle, right? Now you can find only runs from CircleCI, for example. Again, you have all the information about where it ran, link to the run, you have commit information and so on, right? Versions, and you can easily find if maybe one CI is worse or one browser. Okay, majority of the times you have only single CI, so your tags would be something like smoke or nightly or particular way of running tests, right? And by the way, a lot of people ask, how do I run just some tests, right, by tag? This is a plugin that I've written, so just use that to actually pick tests, right, to run. Okay, just put it in your pipelines, and then you will see it. Okay, do I have all specs finished? Okay, so again, expected failure that I'm keeping just so you can see the results. Specs, all three ran in a row because we're not using parallelization yet. Right? Oh, by the way, again, the group is bad. So I'll say group, and I'll say all tests. Okay, so inside the run, I want to have nice little name for all the tests. Okay. So I've shown yesterday GitHub Actions, and today I'm showing CircleCI orb. And while on the surface they look similar, right? They all are a simplification or abstraction that me, when I was at Cypress, created around the tool that we were writing so that you don't have to worry about it. Under the hood, they work very, very differently, right? And it's kind of exciting because every CI is the same, right? I mean, it's all just little containers, and they have to pass build files into the next container. Everyone has to do caching and so on. So the last 2 years, I would say the separation between the CIs is in a way they allow you to configure and reuse configs. So Circle was the first one that allowed orbs, reusable pieces of CI logic, and GitHub Actions later started running, added GitHub Actions. So the interesting thing about GitHub Actions, if you look at GitHub Action itself, right, and you look at the source, source is in index.js. It literally is just JavaScript, and JavaScript is the one that caches files, calls like utilities to cache, right? It literally is JavaScript running on GitHub Action while it's doing its CI job, okay? And the GitHub, the CircleCI orbs are the opposite. The CircleCI orb is nothing but a text substitution or macro expansion language, okay? Literally, it takes your file, and whenever it sees this inside the orbs, it goes, finds the orb source, which is right here under source, right? It takes this whole text and substitutes it, and then like removes all unused things. It's literally just text replacing text. And then when it sees Cypress run, it finds, let's say jobs, right? Finds the run and substitutes all parameters, right, into its actual steps right here. So it replaces your little definition here with these steps definitions using, all parameters like, did you pass parallel flag? Did you pass, I don't know, start, right? Like right here. literally, when it sees parameter start, which we have, it will replace this line with this actual step that will be final thing to run. Like it's amazing. So it just substitutes until the whole file has been processed. And the cool thing about this is that you can do this statically. You don't have to actually push the commit to see if your CircleCI config file is correct or not, which saves you so much time if you just experimenting. So the way you do it, you install this CircleCI CLI utility. Okay, so I already installed it. So let's see if this file is correct or not. So I'll say CircleCI config validate, I think, circle, and then once in a while check for updates if it hasn't checked in a while. Okay, it says it's valid. Okay, what if I try to use something, let's say, like a singular tag, because I don't remember, right? What if I try to use a parameter that this orb doesn't have in this particular version? So when I check, it tells me right away, unexpected arguments in this particular job. I don't have to push anything. I don't have to wait for the CI to reply to me. So now it's correct. And then I can push. So what do I have here? Okay, add group name. Okay, so another thing that you can do is, and this is documented here as well. If you want to review the code, right, and actually see, okay, I've written this short little file, but something is not working correctly on CI, right? Like, and I don't understand why it's doing something. Maybe the parameter is wrong, maybe the order is wrong, because this hides everything, and on Circle, it will actually expand because it will substitute all the parameters into the orb job definitions. You want to see it locally, right? And here's what you can do. You can call the process, CircleCI config process command. So instead of validate, you say process. And here where at the end, you have all these comments. So this is the original config file, the short version. But right above it, this is the final result. So after you substitute all the text, this is what will run on Circle. It will say, okay, use this Docker image, right? Run it on a single machine, define where Cypress is cached explicitly, right? And then run all the steps, like check out the code, restore the cache, right? If you were writing this file manually, this is what you would actually write yourself, okay? Save cache, start in the background, because we did pass npm start command, right? All the things. It even formed this npx run command. And notice there are all these empty lines because those placeholders were not necessary in this particular case. But because we passed record true, it added command line -- record. And because we passed tags and groups, it added those parameters to the Cypress run command line. Okay, so you can locally see how the final thing will look by saying, okay, CircleCI config process. So I think it's pretty cool. And by the way, when you look at the run, okay, like right here, let's see. So this is a job, this is workflow, and you can click at configuration file, right? So this is the original, okay, and this is the effective or compiled. Okay, so this is what you're running from this little file. So you can look it up. I think it's amazing that this becomes fully fledged file and you can go back and forth. Okay. So we we ran everything. We checked out the code, we installed the dependencies, we cached them, we started the server, everything in a single job. But like I said, sometimes you just want to build something and then run test jobs in parallel using the build artifacts. So that's why Cypress allows you to install things separately using Cypress install. Okay, and let's just do this. So I will install everything, and I can give it a name. So it's like install everything. And here I will run Cypress tests. And now I have to say requires, because I want to run this job after the previous job finishes. So I'll say requires and just list all the jobs that I want to wait on, because there might be different jobs. Like one job could install and then linting, unit tests, and then after linting and unit tests finished, then you want to run Cypress tests. Okay, so that's how we specify dependencies between the jobs. And right now, the Cypress run by default doesn't know that it doesn't have to install anything. So that's why we can say we can pass our own install command that will override the default logic. Okay, so let's try this. Separate install command. So I'm going to push it so it lets the process. Now, the thing that I want to tell you right away is that in the orb repo, you have lots of examples. All right, simple recording, storing artifacts, run multiple commands, run commands in subfolder. But sometimes you need something bigger, right? You need more realistic examples, and that's why there is a page with the recipes. For example, a very common pattern was I want to install everything, I want to run the test, and if the test pass, release, like do semantic release. So here's an example where you have one job to install, another job to run tests, and another job that runs after install and test finish, right? Nothing to install, right? And it doesn't even need to run Cypress tests, right? We can actually override the command. So instead of Cypress run by default, you do your own thing. And you rely on caching and the workspace, right, from Cypress run. So you don't have to even wait for something or think, how do I cache if I don't use Cypress org? Okay, so here's our workflow. First, install everything and then run Cypress tests. Okay, so let's see. Once it restores, it will skip the installation because it attached the workspace created by the install job. And that's how you pass not just the source code that you checked out, but also the installed node modules and Cypress cached folder. Okay, so install, that just ran our echo command that we pass custom command, so that you didn't have to install anything, you already have it, right? And then you start running tests immediately. Okay, so this is all good. Again, if you use yarn, just set yarn true. And now we're getting to what's so powerful about CircleCI, right? And what's powerful, if you look at this job, so it's running on medium Docker, branch, commit, offer. We're running through the step. Notice right here, 1 out of 16 parallel runs. So if you're like me and you see this, oh wait, I can have more test containers for free. Basically, here's the situation. GitHub, Circle, they all compete for developers. That's why if you use GitHub Actions and you have public project, then by default, they give you 4 or 8, or 2, I forgot the exact number. But basically, you can run tests on every operating system for free, right? Just knock yourself out. And Circle for a long time used to give you 4 containers for free, even for your private projects, right? Which is unbelievable. And for open source, they give you 16 containers at once, right? For free. So let's take advantage of that. We have single job. So how do we run tests in parallel? Easy. All right. We already install everything. So we don't even need to install anything here, and we'll remove a command. You know why? Because when you run things in parallel, the orb assumes that you installed in a separate job already. Okay, so you don't even need to kind of walk around. And how many machines? Well, we have 3 spec files. We know that we can go up to 3. Otherwise, there will be no difference. Okay, so we'll just specify parameter, which is something orb knows. And let's say run test in parallel on CircleCI. We'll push it. So remember how we had to do the same thing on GitHub, where we had to create our own matrix, kind of like do this weird workaround, I would say. On Circle, you just say, yeah, give me 3 machines. Give me 60 machines, right, for free. On commercial plans, with default plan, you can go up to 200 machines, right? Because they charge per minute. So it doesn't really matter to them. So if you have a lot of long-running tests, you can spin them all, right? And how do you know how many machines to use? Well, you go back to this calculator, and okay, yeah, 3 machines will be optimal, and I cannot improve. But when you have more tests, obviously it will vary, and it will say maybe 8 machines will give you 2 minutes or 5 minutes, and you'll say, yeah, that's acceptable. I can wait 5 minutes. Okay, so let's look at this. It's running, still installing. Okay, this is a full workflow, just like what we have. And let's look at the machines you want. Okay, so it's installed everything, created workspace, passed all the files, the Cypress run automatically assigns, and look, you now have 3 different tabs for each container. And they all kind of start at slightly different times, so the machines never come in precisely unless you do something else, and I'll show this something else later. I have a blog post, but they never come in at the same time, right? So look, this first container is already running for 31 seconds, this one for 12. So there's, machines come and go. Luckily, it doesn't matter. Cypress will wait for machines to join, and it knows. Okay, so it created a run already, latest runs. This is GitHub, this is Circle, specs, machine 1, 2, 3, all done automatically. By the way, you might ask me how Cypress schedules things. It schedules everything based on weighted historical timings of each spec. So the longer running specs will be first, right? And then shorter. And this is more optimal than trying to use something else. Okay, so notice our third machines. If it ran like at the same time, we would finish very quickly, but because it joined 19 seconds later, no, 32 seconds later, right? That's this gap. Okay, calculator, see, I even have old information here. It's no longer 4, it's 16 now. Okay. All these things, right? How do I build an application? Right, definitely a good question. Let's say lots of examples, build. This is kind of build application after install, right? We want to build application once, and then we want to pass it through workspace, right? And do that and test this application. So all examples. Run tests in several groups. Absolutely no problem. We can, again, maybe run first job and say smoke or sanity, right? Let's just run a single spec, right? Say spec free, run it. And this thing will say it requires run Cypress test, and this one is sanity, and this one is all. So this would be sanity. And do we need parallelism? No, just one. We can keep parallel true, that's fine. We can parallelize everything. And I think this is all good. We don't have to do anything else. Let's verify. Yep, we updated the names correctly. Separate jobs. Okay, so while it's doing this, print Cypress info instead of a build command, we can do npx Cypress info. We can change the browser as long as the browser is installed. So we would have to change the executor, right? So here's another example where I would say Docker. This goes right here. Sorry, wrong link. But this is how you could, bring your own Docker image with Chrome or Firefox or Edge pre-installed, and then just say, I want to use my executor image from right here and switch the browser. Right, pretty nice. And now CircleCI allows you to run tests both on Linux and Windows and Mac. So find those examples there. And again, you don't have to use Cypress dashboard, but it makes it very convenient to see the results like I've shown. And it allows you to do parallelization very, very easily. Okay, so from a previous run, 2 machines were successful, 1 have failed. If I want to look at the failure, I would look at Cypress dashboard. This is our new workflow. Install everything, run just a single spec. If that passes, then we test everything. Kind of common recipe, I would say. Any questions so far? Because we're almost at the end of CircleCI, right? A section. Very, very common question, right? Especially when you start using Cypress. If you have your code for your application in one repository, but your tests are in another repository, how do you run them, right? How do you keep it and so on? So I have a very detailed blog post because unfortunately that's something people are asking and doing. There is a long list of disadvantages to this approach, like the code and test are out of sync, like the pull requests checks are all in the wrong repo. But if you have to do it, you can do this on Circle, and on GitHub there is the same blog post for GitHub. But basically the idea is when you deploy application or you build application in one repo, you would trigger a workflow with tests on Circle. And I even have a little helper, so you don't have to struggle because it's difficult to do it during using curl parameters, especially if you want to trigger it in the right branch if it exists, for example. So I have a little utility called trigger CircleCI pipeline, where from one repo you just say, okay, start for workflow. And the best thing about this, you can pass the test URL. So if you deploy somewhere, then you can trigger CircleCI and pass parameter. And in your workflow, you can just use this as a Cypress-based URL to point at your deployment. So see the blog post and example repos. I've been kind of showing this, right? Like all these examples, like how to run things on Linux, Mac, or Windows, and so on, they all are in the README and in examples, and the larger things are in the recipes. So you can always find them here. And because I love using Circle, before GitHub Action actually opened up, I ran everything on Circle because it's just so good, so fast, so powerful. So you can find a lot of blog posts about something specific for Circle on my blog. So that's one resource. And specifically, if you find that different machines start at different times or are slow, you can get a big speed up because Circle allows you to, instead of creating a container with actual file system, you can put the file system in memory. Because, you know, all those containers are like at least 2-3 gigabytes of memory. So, and we have like what, 500 megabytes of files, including dependencies. So you can fit it all in memory. In that case, it's much, much faster. So I've written how to do that. It's not compatible with CircleCI Orb, unfortunately, and I didn't have time to do this, but all these resources are pretty nice. Okay, let's look at this. Okay, all tests, sanity tests passed, and then we ran all specs and it has failed. Let's look how it looks. Separate jobs, specs, and this is how we have one group, and I should have changed the name, the group name to 2, so they arrive in the right order. But you can see from the timeline that this ran first, and then 3 machines executed all the tests, and you can find the failure. Right? You can see the command log out, terminal output, and so on. Okay, so what else do I have? I probably will show this because it's actually pretty cool. So look at the workshop, right? So I have all my commits, right? For each commit, I have GitHub Actions, right? Reporting the results, right? For each job. And if I click on details, it goes to, you know, the job definition. Right? I mean, it's nice, but I have no idea what actually has failed. I have to look at the terminal output, and then I have to go there and maybe find the link to the dashboard. And then in the dashboard, I have to find the failed spec, look at the screenshot. So it's actually much, much easier to use Cypress GitHub integration. And if you just want to see it step by step, it's right here. But it's so easy to do. I'll just show it. Okay, so here's my workshop example app. Okay, and I'll go to settings on GitHub, and you can do the same thing on GitLab, Bitbucket, and so on. I'll go to applications, and if you don't have Cypress installed, Cypress GitHub app, you can find it and install it. I'll go to configure. Let me just add a password. Okay, so right now I only enable Cypress GitHub integration app on some repositories. So I'll say workshop example. Okay. Well, okay, so now Cypress GitHub integration has access to that project. Now I can go to, where is the workshop example? I have way too many. Let me just find it from here. Project settings and GitHub integration, workshop example, the one that I just enabled, it knows the name. Status checks, yes, I want to have status checks. Do I want to have one check per run group? I'll enable, because I have only a few specs, I'll enable a status check for each one. Flaky test, we don't have flaky tests. And PR comments, including screenshots, yes. Okay, we enabled GitHub integration. Now, here's what it gives us. Let's say I create a new branch, right? Let's say branch 1. And I'll create an empty commit just for show. Okay. And I'll push this branch. All right. So I'm opening my I'm opening a PR just like I do day to day. Here's my workshop example. And it detected new branch. I'm opening pull request. Okay. I hope it passes, creating a pull request. Okay. So it starts running the test. It runs the test on commit, and Circle runs things on pull request automatically. Okay. Notice this. All of a sudden, you have a Cypress logo appear, right? So it's running smoke tests. If we click on details, you go immediately to to the test results. Like this is, and it's the branch, right? So by enabling Cypress GitHub integration, you have all these checks that appear from Cypress side. Okay, and this works with any CI. So if you use Jenkins, results uploaded, recorded to Cypress dashboard from Jenkins, and from there, Cypress sets the status check on GitHub. So even if you don't have direct integration already, it's done for you. And the cool thing about this is that I enable detailed, per spec status checks. You can, if you have a lot of specs, you probably want to do just the groups. A few specs are failing as expected, right? And if I go here, I immediately look at the screenshot. By the way, let's look at the previous runs. Now it always failed on this branch, right? I've never seen it because that's a branch. Okay, and here's something else that's really cool. We'll just have to wait for this to finish. 1 second. We have to finish because of I enabled the pull request comments, but the pull request comment will, in this case, will come from Circle, I believe, but because only the Circle is building for PR, GitHub is only enabled for the push commit event. So let's just see. Okay, running the sanity. And then it will run all the tests, they will fail. Okay, so here's what happens, right? So where did this run? Let me just verify. Okay, so no, the pull request was still, so this was a comment from GitHub. Okay, so GitHub integration app comments on the pull request the results. All the tests, where they ran, how long they took. And because they're a failing test, it actually created a little thumbnail. So I can immediately navigate it. If I didn't have any failures, I would just have all green, very safe to merge kind of situation. But because it did fail, I have all the failed tests for this PR immediately here. And I believe when Circle finishes its run, it will comment again because it's different. And if you push mock commits, these comments will be updated, right? So if you fix the failure, you'll come back and it will be all good because it will update the comment, all green, and all the status checks should be green if you fix the test, and then it's safe to merge. So this is the Cypress GitHub integration. And okay, we're on top of an hour, and before we take a 5-minute break, I truly believe that CircleCI org is probably the easiest way of running Cypress tests, building the app, then running the test, building the app, then running a bunch of tests in parallel so they can all finish very, very quickly. And it's all because they abstract everything and they can pass all the files and do the caching for you. You don't even have to think about it. It kind of just works, and it's pretty powerful CI. So to me, this is one of the, I would say, most pleasant CIs to work with. Okay, so all finished, and still one test is failing. Any questions about CircleCI or CI approach in general? Right, if you have questions, feel free to use the chat or the QA widget in Zoom. And if not, let's take maybe 5-7 minute breaks, and 5 or 7 minute break. And when we come back, we're going to finish by running the same test on Netlify build, and we'll deploy the app as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll see everyone in 5 or 7 minutes. Okay, let's continue. We're gonna move on to Netlify build, which is another way you can both deploy and test your sites. And we build a static site, so it's perfect for deployment. And with Netlify, you have to ask yourself, when do you want to run tests, right? Because you can run it before you build, after you build, but before deploy, or after you deploy. By then, it's a little bit too late, right? Because you did not prevent a broken build, but you can roll back. So usually something like a combination of all approaches is the best thing. Again, this is something that I've written specifically for Netlify. It's a plugin for their build system. So let's see how it goes. Haven't done this in a while though, so I will rely on the documentation. Netlify is famous for easy deployment, and the goal for this plugin was to make sure the testing is as easy as the deployment. Okay, so here's what I will do. I'll go to Netlify, log in, and I'll say new site, I guess. GitHub, continue. So I'll say workshop example. Okay, same situation as what we had with Cypress dashboard app. I only enabled it for some repositories, not for all. Okay, now I enabled it for everything. Workshop, right? And it guessed a few things, right? It's me, it found the branch, npm run build, publish folder. I don't think that's the right publish folder. It has to be site. So site. You can see advanced. I think it's all fine. Let's see if it can deploy. Wait. Build and deploy. Site. Okay. So we can look at deploys, and right now it's installing everything, right? Installing, including Cypress, does its thing. Okay, good. Now we want to add. Okay, I've shown this, right? We don't have to change any command or any command. Netlify runs, using the log file, so it installs things correctly. What we do have to do is we have to create a Netlify file where we can add our plugins so that it knows how to install, run tests. Having a Netlify file is much better than kind of editing everything here, because it's all going to be in source control, so everyone can see it, review it, and so on, not in the GUI. So this deployed already. This is our build site, which is great. Love it. Now let's add Netlify file. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back to the main branch, and I'll add a TOML file, which is kind of like YAML, but not quite. And these are the settings that repeat what we have set in the GUI, but now they're explicitly set up in Netlify TOML file. Okay. Let's see. So I'll say add Netlify TOML. We'll push it, and Netlify has to trigger a build again, right? Production. Now you will see that it's building, right, and then deploying. All good things. So we need to add our plugin, and the plugin in this case is just an npm package. And the interesting thing, so GitHub Actions, they work directly from another repo. CircleCI orb went and got the version of orb from CircleCI orb registry that they maintain. With Netlify plugin Cypress, it's just npm package. So let's see how many versions there are. Okay, there are 2.2 is the list. So I'm gonna install it as a dev dependency. Let's see. And then we'll just add it to our Netlify toml under plugins. Okay, meanwhile, let's look at the deployment. So we built it and deployed it and completed, right? So these commands, Netlify build, complete, Netlify build. So Netlify has its own build system, and it has certain stages, right? Pre-build, post-build, pre-deploy. Actually, no. Post-build and pre-deploy is the same. But then when it deploys, deploy can finish successfully, and it will fire on success, or it can fail, in which case it will be on error. And you can create plugins that can insert pieces of JavaScript that run pre-build, post-build, on success, on error. So our Netlify plugin from Cypress can operate on multiple, during multiple steps by exposing those hooks. Okay, let's see what, okay, add Netlify plugin. And let's just see what happens. I think by default, it should do the right thing, but let's see what is happening there. Meanwhile, we'll consult documentation. Okay, so here's what I expect to happen. It will fire on success callback, right? So once Netlify builds, deploys, then we'll execute on success callback provided by the plugin, right? And we will see something like this, I hope. So let's take a look. Okay, build. On pre-build event, it installs and verifies Cypress, prints Cypress information. All right. Then it builds. So you can think of pre-build almost like your install step, right? Post-build, nothing. Then deploying the site, which is what Netlify does. And then we have on success event. And here's the cool thing. Netlify deploys production site or pull request, right? And it gives you a unique URL. In this case, notice it's like the branch name and then a commit name, right? So this is what the plugin will take from the Netlify build system, and it will run the test against that URL using base URL. And in this case, it's the same thing. Pre-specs found, one has failed, and the same error message. Okay. Actually, check this out, right? It failed even on the spec 1, right? Because there was a difference in the URL. So let's take a look at this URL. So when I click on README, look, it did not redirect to uppercase. So Netlify normalizes the URLs and makes them lowercase. Okay, and this is a perfect example of why you want to test the site before and after deploys, because your assumptions will be proven wrong. I always get tripped up by, slash at the end of a URL, right? Is it there or not? It might be there in localhost, might not be there when you deploy, or vice versa. This URL normalization, right? You want to test the site after you deploy, so you make sure that the production site behaves the way you want it to behave. So let's fix this, because this is bad. Okay, so it navigates to README test, right? This is the assertion. So location path name should, equal README. Or should match maybe, and we'll give it a regular expression, right? And what? And we'll say what? None. So why doesn't it? Trying to write a regular expression. Okay, like this. And it should not be case sensitive. And let's fix this thing. And in this case, I'll just say include. I'll also probably match. Right. Okay, so we're fixing the assertions, so they're working both locally. URL assertions. Right. But before we do that, here's something else that we want to consider. Right. There are all these warnings, but were they there? I think there were. Right, like this one. So we want to fix that, by specifying environment variables that will be applied during the build step. So we want to take Netlify and add whatever else environment variables to use. We fixed this, right? But we could not get to the test artifacts, right? So this failed. We know it saved the screenshots. We know it saved the videos. There is no way to get those files from Netlify. We could get it from GitHub Actions, and we could get them from Circle as test artifacts, but Netlify doesn't provide this at all. So we do need to record what the plugin is doing. So this is how you pass additional inputs to the plugin, by having this section under the plugin. And the parameters, again, are close to what CircleCI orb does, but and they're all described in the README right here. Okay. And let's see. We do need to create a new key for recording. So I'll say GitHub Ahmedov workshop example. I'll go to the project settings, new record key, and I'll copy it, deploy details, and okay, where do I specify this? Under build, okay, build and deploy. So deploy settings, environment, edit variables, Cypress, record key, save it. Okay, I think this is all we need. So record from Netlify. The only other thing, can we tag? Yes. So we want to record and we want to give it a tag so we can find this particular recording later. So we'll say Netlify and group all tests. Okay. Add tag and group name. Let's see how it behaves this time. So we'll go to deploys. By the way, this is important, right? This is what I said. When do you want to run the test? The plugin ran on successful deployment. So from the position of Netlify, deployment was successful. The fact that the test after the deployment has finished, they do not change the status of deployment, right? It's up to you to roll back or deploy again or fix the test, right? So this is how it displays. The plugin has failed, but by then it was already a successful deployment. So it was published, just, not probably should be reconsidered. Now I pushed again, it ran the test, and right now it's running. Notice the tag and the group, whatever I specify in the plugin were passed to Cypress. And the first test has finished, right? Looking good. Let's see the whole thing finishes. And meanwhile, let's look at the runs. So we have our normal usual suspects like GitHub and Circle, but now we have the Netlify, right? Specs. And from position of Cypress dashboard, it never seen this particular spec coming from Netlify system. So that's why it's marked new. And we have all the build information as well from Netlify, including the branch. This is all good. And unfortunately, there is no parallel test running because Netlify build system, I don't think it allows yet to run multiple machines. They mentioned they're working on this, but so far, no. So if you want to parallelize running the test against the deploy, you know what you do? You implement, let's see, from my website, Netlify. There is a plugin called Netlify plugin GitHub Dispatch. You connect it to your build, right? And you have it on, let's say, GitHub Actions. And so when deployment is finished, you get notified and it triggers GitHub Actions run. And that's where it passes the deployed URL, okay? And that's what you can actually run your test against. So this is how you'd get around once you reach certain slow tests on Netlify build, you start using this. Okay, great. So we haven't updated this test, so it still fails. But I think this shows pretty well how the system works. By the way, notice this message, scheduled to complete and only then complete. Remember how we specified multiple test groups? So we ran this group, and then if that finished, we start another group. The only thing Cypress dashboard knows is that you want to have a single logical run, right? So you want to start something. So you would have something like new run A, let's say A1, and then there'll be 1, 2, 10 machines joining, and they all want to join and do this, like execute all the specs in this group. In this case, just a single spec, right? So it could be probably one machine. And what happens when it's finished? The dashboard thinks, okay, well, all the specs from that group were split across all machines, nothing else to run, right? Should I stop the run? A1? It doesn't know, right? Maybe, this is your whole file with just a single Cypress run. Or maybe you will start running all the tasks that should still go under the same run. So the way Cypress dashboard does it, it allows you to not specify all this kind of saying, stop the run command. No, because you don't know, it's a bad taste, I think, right? Instead, the dashboard, when the last machine finishes all the specs, it says, okay, wait 1 minute, then close the run. Okay, so if during that minute you start a new set of tests, right, like we do right here, then you just continue running them, right? And it's same logical run. And when that group finishes, so let's say 3 machines finish all specs, right, from here, then it wait 1 minute. And because no more machines start anything, nothing joins it, then closes A1. So there is a timeout after all specs have finished and there are no more running groups. There's a timeout to actually close the run. So this timeout is something you can control per project. And by default, it's 60 seconds, right? Which is plenty of time for Circle, for example, to spin these machines and say Cypress run and join the same logical run. Now, sometimes, let's say you sleep for 5 minutes, and then you try joining the same run, but it was already closed because Cypress dashboard didn't know you were planning to add more test results. So it said, okay, wait for 1 minute and then stop. So if you regularly find that you have an error, hey, try to join a run that's already finished, you just modify it, 120 seconds, maybe 300, right? I would say 60 seconds is plenty by default, but if not, know that this is the error that you can change, or the setting you can change to avoid that error. If you have multiple groups, right, and test runs, multiple groups in the same test run. All right, so this was it. So we recorded the test results. We can fix it, but I already set the tags, right? Again, everything is documented here, right? So if you have a problem, just look at the examples and usually it's enough. So the only other thing, and let me just check if, right, so this is explanation for the phases. During pre-build, we install Cypress, caching and so on. We can build the site, so Netlify builds it using whatever command we passed, and we can run tests post-build as well. And if they fail, then it will not deploy. So we'll prevent bad deploys. So here's how we can do this. We're gonna add one section right here. Okay. I don't want to modify. So I'll Netlify. Okay. So remember, this is how we pass the inputs to this plugin, right? That's immediately above us. And in this parameter, it's the whole object is a parameter. And it has parameters kind of similar to what we have here, because we literally are running tests, so we need all these parameters. And if this test will run more tests, right? So what do we have? We need to specify the start command, and it already will use npx, so it's very, kind of simplified. We are recording. We're gonna tag Netlify again, but the group will be let's say before deploy. Right, and this will be after deploy. So this will be group 1, and this is group 2. So first, all these tests have to pass. And if they pass, then the Netlify build system will deploy the site, and then it will call our step again on success. And we'll run the test against the deployed URL again. And notice, because these tests are disabled by default, we have to enable them. And we can actually disable tests after deploy if we want to. So it's up to you. Okay, so let's say run test before deploy. Let's see if this works. Yeah, so one of the good ideas or nice ideas was you run all the tests here and just some small tests like Cypress integration spec 1, or, right? One of the tests after, just like make sure like all the URLs work, nothing throws an error kind of situations. So let's see how this goes. Building. No, I don't want to go to the commit. I just want to click on the row. Okay, installing things. By the way, to take full advantage of caching, we have to configure something else. I look at documentation. So now look at this. We actually starting the site locally before deploying it. It runs at localhost, and we're running Cypress test against this URL. By the way, all this warning stuff comes from Electron, running on Linux. Sometimes it complains too much, and Cypress doesn't do a good job filtering all these warnings. Okay, so running. Let's look at recordings. So run test before deploy. Where's just Netlify specs. So the group is before deploy, right? Runs things one by one. So spec 2. So this is a spec, and then spec 2, and it shows the name of the currently running spec. So far looking good. Okay, so all good before we deploy. So now it can actually continue and do the deployment and then run the tests there. So that's how we can prevent bad deploys from going. Okay, I already said that Netlify is pretty limited. It's just a single machine doing everything. It does optimize some things. It does some smart caching for most popular frameworks, right? Like Next versus whatever, Gatsby versus ours. It knows how to cache those things, but running the test usually is the expensive part, right? After you deploy. So you might think how you can separate the build and local testing. We're running lots of tests after you deploy. So my suggestion is to say, start your test somewhere else. If your website grows and the number of tests grows with it. Okay, we already enabled GitHub status checks, right? From Cypress dashboard, that's why we have a commits, right? So I've shown how to do this, right? So let's open a pull request because I want to see how Netlify does this. You check out Netlify demo, let's see. So I'm just gonna open a pull request really quickly in the repo. Okay, so when this runs, notice Netlify adds its own status checks, right? Including deploy preview. So right now it's building just like GitHub, Cypress GitHub Action or Cypress GitHub integration app. Comments on each pull request, same thing, all right? Netlify does the same thing. That's why both systems, I would say, encourage pull request workflow, where you open pull request, run test against it, share the URL, look at the site, right? See how it runs, if it does what this pull request is supposed to do, and then you merge it in. So this is a very good system, I would say. So this runs the tests locally. Notice this is still pending because Netlify will not start deploying until we finish the tests. Okay. Always nice long tests. Okay, just in case, I'm gonna post the link to the Netlify plugin. Okay, so all tests before deploy have finished. The deployment should start deploying the site, built it, deployed it, and we're gonna run test against the deployed URL. What does it say? Well, browse the preview so we can see. Notice the URL has a different branch name, so we can see every latest deployed branch preview. Okay, and this is the same URL we are testing right here, right? The same deploy preview. Again, Netlify build system knows where it deployed, and it just calls the Netlify our plugin with that URL saying, hey, here's the deployed URL, so that we can test it correctly. And let's look if this is true. So latest run, demo. Notice it has pull request number 2 on a branch. It ran on Netlify, right? We already finished 5 out of 6 specs. So we ran the same 3 tests before deploy, and now we're running the tests after. And if we look at the timeline, and let's look at the video of a test run, right? We see the deploy preview URL. So we are testing the right URL ultimately. Let's see if the test finishes and shows us everything. Nice. Okay, so the videos are all available. And again, this test has lowercase readme and expects it to be uppercase. So we know that the build system is different from the local. Okay, I've shown this. Okay, just to review, compare my top 3 systems, right, for build is GitHub Actions, CircleCI, Netlify build. And the Netlify is excellent when you just want to deploy something, you want to see previews, but also build the site and run some tests, right? These are tests that are not super heavy. They test the static site. They can call functions, call the APIs, right? but they cannot be run in parallel. And compared to GitHub Actions and Netlify and Circle, Netlify doesn't even allow you to store any test results. So the Cypress dashboard is something that must be used to see the failed tests, successful tests, do status checks, and so on. Definitely think about which tests are important to run before you deploy, and maybe which tests can run after deploy, right? You want to make sure that you don't deploy a known broken site, right? But also, as you can see from my example, there's definitely a difference between running the site locally and the deployed site. It's a big operation, changing all the code, transpiling into bundles, and deploying and processing the URLs, right? Can definitely change the outcome of tests, right? Luckily, with this plugin, you can run tests in a very flexible way before or after deploy, and you can specify which tests to run in both steps. I think this is the end of the workshop. I'll be very happy to answer any questions, and if not, definitely take a look at the workshop repository. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions later. If you open an issue, for example, in this project, we can communicate like that, or we can communicate through Twitter, or you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find my email, and so on. So hope that this workshop was useful to you, and I hope that you'll be able to successfully run Cypress with minimal configuration hassles, where you can actually concentrate on your app rather than on your CI specifics. And for my American audience, happy Thanksgiving. All right. There are no questions, so have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining and thanks for watching.